that the Patriots not only have brought Joe Judge home to the coaching staff, they have announced the hire, which I actually don't think is insignificant because for the most part, when the Patriots make these coaching moves, for example, last year with Matt Patricia, Alex, there was never an announcement. We kind of showed up, there was reports of it. Then we showed up at training camp and he was in the media guide as a whatever his official title is, liaison, consultant, assistant to the head coach, I think is technically the title for Patricia. This one was formally announced by the team, released by the team's Twitter account, blasted to the media, and Joe Judge is officially an offensive assistant for the Patriots. So now the question is, what does that mean? How much involvement is he going to have in the respect of him essentially being an offensive coordinator or a de facto offensive coordinator? But first, Alex, your reaction to Joe Judge coming back home to New England.
Yeah, I don't hate it in a bubble. I think he's somebody good to have in the building. We talked about him potentially, taking over some sort of a special teams role after special teams weren't ideal this year. I still don't buy him. Forget offensive coordinator. I still don't buy him as an offensive coach. I still don't. Before he got into special teams, when he began his career, before he's with the Patriots, he started off as a linebackers coach. He was a special teams coach before coming to New England, was a special teams coach in New England. They threw that wide receiver coach title at him, but that was in 2019. How'd the wide receiver development go in 2019? I don't buy it. I think he's a good voice to have in the building. I think he's a good brain to have in the building. And they don't always have coaches stick to their role. When Troy Brown was officially the running backs coach, he was with receivers a lot. So I'm assuming what they're telling us versus what he's actually going to do are two different things. But that's how I feel. That's how I feel about it.
That's a fair read on it. And certainly Daniel Jones under Joe Judge over the last 2 years was a disaster in New York. The 31st ranked offense in the 2 seasons that Judge was the head coach with the Giants, to the point where they bring in Brian Daboll as the head coach. They hire Mike Kafka as the quarterback's coach. And they've basically done everything under the sun now in New York to make the quarterback possible, right? To make the quarterback good because of how bad things were for Daniel Jones under Joe Judge. So I totally understand everybody's reservations with this. Now, talking to people putting things together here today, it does sound like Judge is going to have some OC responsibilities. I'm not ready to go as far as saying that he's going to be the play caller, but I do think that he's going to have some responsibilities in the direction of the offense in general, the game planning week to week, and have a hand in a lot of the big decision-making processes of the offense during the season. He is not here to be a Matt Patricia. He is not here to advise Bill Belichick and to walk around and chat on the side with players and pull guys aside and give his 2 cents when it's asked. He is here to be a coach and to be hands-on and to be involved on the offensive side of the ball. Now, my sense is that this is not the only move that's coming for the Patriots on offense, but I don't think that there's going to be another big shoe to drop. The next shoe that does drop is going to be a size 9, not a size 16, right? I don't think we're going to get into one of those big name coordinator hires. I'll talk about it in a second. Why not Bill O'Brien? And I have some theories as to why maybe Bill O'Brien isn't coming here to New England. But the way that I am putting it together now with this hire with Joe Judge, and we were just talking about this before we hit record, is that the Patriots are trying to build offensively what they have on the defensive side of the ball, where Joe Judge is essentially Gerard Mayo, right? He has a pretty big say in game planning. He leads meetings. He has a lot of discussions involved in terms of the stylistic approach on that side of the football, but maybe isn't the primary play caller. The primary play caller is still yet to be seen. It could be Mick Lombardi. His name has come up a lot, and he has really garnered a lot of attention in recent weeks, I would say more so than when we first started talking about this when Josh McDaniels left for the Raiders. Last couple of days, last week or so, Mick Lombardi's name has begun to surface a lot more as somebody that they're high on internally and that could take on more responsibility. So maybe they feel Mick Lombardi could be somebody that takes on those play calling duties. I still am not sleeping on Adam Gase potentially being on this staff come training camp. And maybe they get into a situation where Judge and Adam Gase are essentially co-offensive coordinators, but neither guy has the title. It could be that way with Mick Lombardi too, or an internal candidate as well. So I'm not totally sold that Joe Judge is going to be the play caller, but I'm pretty certain that he's going to have a pretty big say in a lot of the game planning and a lot of the hands-on stuff that has to go on behind the scenes on the coaching staff.
Yeah, and that's concerning to me. This is where I'm more so concerned. Like I said, I don't necessarily mind Joe Judge as an individual being in the building. What I'm more concerned about is what happened on defense happening on offense, because the defensive side of the ball has a lot more talent than the offensive side of the ball. And look, who knows what it'll look like after the offseason. But the defense, in spite of everything that happened with the coaching staff, was still the second-ranked defense in the league. What does the offense look like if wires get crossed? The other thing is, on defense, you have guys like Devin McCourty, like Donta Hightower, who have been around, who know what they're doing, who are essentially like coaches on the field. The most important long-term storyline for this team is Mac Jones' development. And now you're going to make that unclear. So I think the one thing they absolutely have to do, if they're going to go with this convoluted, flow chart on offense, which I don't think they should do, but if they're going to do that, the one thing they absolutely have to do is have a defined quarterbacks coach. That role was split last year between Josh McDaniels and Bo Hardigree. I don't necessarily think splitting it between those two guys specifically was a bad idea. I think it obviously worked. Mac was good last year. I think you need a dedicated quarterbacks coach who is not named Adam Gase on the staff. I think that is now, if they're going to do, like, short of bringing in Bill O'Brien as a defined offensive coordinator, finding a dedicated and competent quarterbacks coach to work with Mac is now priority one for the staff for the rest of the offseason. I think that has to be the next step.
It's a horrible setup for Mac Jones. There's no other way to put it. Talking about Mac Jones' development here, I think, is really the biggest thing. When Josh McDaniels took the Raiders job, I think the outcry, and maybe this was just on our show, in our comment section, in my Twitter replies, was that this could ultimately be a blessing in disguise because they could get some fresh perspectives. They could get some new ideas. They could get some more innovation going on offense and get some more adaptation, right? In terms of just college game stuff, RPOs, spread elements, things that we've talked about on the show. I think what we're learning here quickly is that the grass is not always greener on the other side. And the one thing that you can definitely say about Josh McDaniels and his ability to mentor and bring along Mac Jones last season was an absolute home run from start to finish. Sure, you can nitpick the fact that McDaniels hands the ball off to Brandon Bolden on 3rd and short, or has a weird play calling sequence in the red zone, or was too conservative here or too conservative there. But his ability to develop Mac from the day that Mac Jones got in the building to the end of his rookie season was fantastic. He was fantastic at it. And at this point, I have real major concerns out of anything else that has to do with this, because the other point I wanted to make was, I think the biggest thing when it comes to both sides of the football for Bill Belichick is that he's trying to build a program where they're running the same system, the same playbook, regardless of who the coordinator is and regardless of who is calling the plays year in and year out, so that there's continuity across the board. So that when you lose a Josh McDaniels, all you have to do is elevate a Mick Lombardi or bring back a Joe Judge, and you start running the same program, right? You start running the same playbook that you were running before, and nobody ever skips a beat. But now they're in a situation with a young quarterback that needs grooming, that needs mentorship, that needs guidance. And this isn't just as simple as who's going to be calling the plays on Sundays. This has to go in practice, in film session, in review, in all the little details behind the scenes. Now, the one little bit of saving grace that I have about this for Mac is if there's one guy, ironically, that isn't actually technically on the roster as of right now, but I think will be, that I might actually trust to bring Mac along, it's Brian Hoyer. And this formula for a lot of other teams and a lot of other OCs around the league, from Kevin O'Connell to Kellen Moore to all these quarterbacks, ex backup quarterbacks turn play callers, turn offensive coordinators, Alex, this has worked in the past, and this continues to work around the league. So although Brian Hoyer is not going to officially be a coach, he's going to be brought back in the building to be a coach. He's getting paid like a player. He's going to wear a jersey, but he's out there on the practice field to coach Mac Jones. So maybe they do feel like, in a way, that Brian Hoyer is enough guidance in that sort of respect that they feel like Mac is in decent hands. But in terms of having this be convoluted between who's actually in charge, who's running the ship, who's in Mac Jones's ear, do we trust the people that they're putting in Mac Jones's ear? This is not a good situation moving forward for the quarterback. And I hope that there is something that they know that we don't about the situation. And maybe it is that Joe Judge is actually a lot smarter and brighter and better than we're giving him credit for. But ultimately, I have a tough time getting there as well.
Joe Judge, was it 19 that he was the wide receivers coach? I want to make sure I get this right.
19 was the wide receivers. And
okay.
You do have to mention that he was also the special teams coach.
I know, but
I'm just saying it was a
wide receiver he was tasked with developing in 2019.
Yeah, there was a lot of responsibility on his plate, though, is my point.
There was. That's fair. Well, it sounds – I don't want him to be the quarterback's coach. I don't think he needs to be the quarterback's coach. And I don't know who it's going to be. It shouldn't be him. It shouldn't be Adam Gase. It should not be. I know you're going to keep saying it and say it's possible. If it's Adam Gase, it's a mistake. Adam Gase, as an offensive coordinator for a high school team, went 4-5, and his quarterback had a negative touchdown to interception ratio. And look, Mac Jones is a hell of a lot more talented. No offense to the quarterback at Lincoln High School in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Mac Jones is a hell of a lot more talented than that kid, but it's level playing field. The opponents aren't as talented either, all of that. You're telling me this great NFL mind, the quarterback whisperer, as his nickname once was, couldn't figure out a way to get a high school kid a positive touchdown interception ratio?
No, I don't like Adam Gase either.
Can't be Gase.
The name that I keep on hearing is Mick Lombardi. And maybe that's the way that they go about it, is that they promote one guy from within, or they give one guy internally a little bit more responsibility, and they give Judge a overseer type of role as well.
He's the adult in the room. I'm not necessarily – I'm not talking about even play caller, though. I'm talking about, like, whoever's going to call plays is going to call plays at this point. If it's not Bill O'Brien, it's going to be somebody who either hasn't done it or doesn't have a lot of experience doing it. I'm already past that. To me, it's – well, who's the quarterback's coach? Who is in the meeting rooms with Mac?
Yeah.
Who is watching Mac and solely Mac on the field at practice, working on his mechanics, things like that? Like, that, to me, is now the most important job. That can't be by committee. That can't be Joe Judge on Tuesday, Mick Lombardi on Wednesday, Nick Caley on Thursday, Matt Patricia on Friday, right? That's got to be somebody. And maybe it's Hoyer. Maybe it is. But Hoyer's also, for all we talk about, Hoyer's a great coach. He still wants to be ready in case he gets a chance to play. He's still doing his own thing to an extent. I want somebody just working with Mac Jones. I want to know who that is, and it needs to be somebody who knows what they're doing, and it needs to be the same person every day.
Yeah, and before we move to Bill O'Brien, because I have some thoughts on that as well, Mick Lombardi did coach quarterbacks at one point. They moved him over to wide receivers a couple years ago. He did coach quarterbacks for the Patriots, I want to say in 18 or 19. Granted, it was Tom Brady who he was coaching. So
he was the assistant quarterbacks coach in 19.
Yes. So he did coach quarterbacks at one point. So this shuffling technically could be as easy as Troy Brown getting full-time at wide receivers, right? And him becoming the full-time wide receivers coach, Mick Lombardi technically being the quarterbacks coach, and Joe Judge remaining as an offensive assistant as the bigger picture guy in the room.
Or even Joe Judge, who was a wide receivers coach,
helping out
becoming
at
the other wide
receiver.
receivers coach, right?
Right.
And then moving Mick Lombardi to quarterbacks. I didn't realize Mick Lombardi had that role in 19. So
Yes.
he's not the worst option. Again, I still think Bill O'Brien was the best option.
Yeah.
Would have
So we
been,
can talk
but
about Bill
yeah,
O'Brien.
go ahead.
So this is interesting to me because when they when Josh McDaniels took the job with the Raiders, they had a conversation with Bill O'Brien, Bill O'Brien's reps. It was put out there. Ian Rappaport reporting about it. Adam Schefter, the big guns, coming in and saying there was mutual interest between the two parties. So at this point, I think it would be pretty far fetched for Bill O'Brien to be the offensive coordinator for the Patriots. I'm not saying it's impossible, but my odds of it happening have dropped significantly from 50-50 to probably 10-15% chance that Bill O'Brien's on this staff next year. So I want to discuss a couple of the reasons or a couple of the theories that I have of why no Billy O, right? Why is Bill O'Brien not coming here? So I think the two biggest things that I can come up with are number one, Bill Belichick and Nick Saban have had an understanding that unless it's mutually beneficial, unless that's really what the coach wants, they're not going to poach from each other's staffs, right? They're not going to go in and they're not going to just take guys from each other's staffs unless it's mutually agreed upon, unless the other guy has a good insurance policy, a good fallback plan, a good plan B, and maybe Nick Saban doesn't want to give up Bill O'Brien, right? The other theory that I have is that I think Bill O'Brien, differently from a guy like Joe Judge, is going to want a lot of autonomy with the offense. He's going to want a lot of control. I actually would go as far to say is that he might actually want a seat at the table with decision making in terms of personnel, right? Who are they drafting? Who are they signing in free agency? How am I going to use that player? So this isn't as simple as we're just going to make you the play caller. I think Bill O'Brien was going to want a seat at the table, right? And similarly to what they gave to Josh McDaniels. So maybe Bill Belichick wasn't prepared to offer him that. Thirdly, you have to talk about pay, right? Because I'm sure Alabama's paying him a decent amount of money to be the OC down there. And you also have to talk about, is the job here in New England that much better for Bill O'Brien than going back to Alabama and coaching the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and putting up another great season of offense? I know they got some guys leaving in the draft, but Alabama's a factory. They're definitely going to have more guys coming up that he's going to be able to work with.
They still have Bryce Young. They still have Will Anderson.
Right. They still got Bryce Young at quarterback. So is it that attractive for Bill O'Brien to jump ship at this point and leave Alabama where he knows he's probably going to look good, right? He knows he's probably going to look pretty darn good. And whether it's Steve Sarkisian or Lane Kiffin, it's very, very plausible that Bill O'Brien could be a head coach just by being the Alabama offensive coordinator for a couple years, then jumping to a college program or even back to the NFL as a head coach if he does a good job there. So end of point is that the Patriots need Bill O'Brien a whole lot more than Bill O'Brien needs the Patriots. And so in order to get him here, I think they really needed to heavily pitch him and incentivize him on the idea of coming. And maybe they just couldn't really bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing you bring up there is some of the control maybe Bill O'Brien would want. What would the offense look like schematically? What would some of the personnel decisions be?
Right.
Because that's part of the reason at the same time, maybe that's part of the reason he won't come here because he won't get that say. At the same time, isn't that kind of what made him the perfect candidate? Was introducing some of those RPOs, some of those more spread concepts. So I don't mean this as a take. I'm posing this question to you. I'm curious what you think about it. Is this an indication, if things hold the way they do, or at least, no more major moves, that the offense is more or less going to look like what it did last year under Josh McDaniels?
110%. I think that this playbook was never going to change fundamentally into anything else than what it currently is. Sure, another guy that's calling plays might have a different sequence of plays that he strings together. Maybe another guy has a different game plan for a certain opponent. But I go back to a quote that Bill Belichick had years ago where he talked about how he wanted to keep the X's and O's the same. So that way, when he loses coordinators, when he loses assistants, even when he loses players, right? Even when he moves on from certain players, it's plug and play and the machine keeps moving. and the belt keeps going. And I think when they look at the offensive side of the football, that's what they feel like they're going to have by giving more responsibility to some of the in-house guys, by bringing Joe Judge back. They don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel with the offensive playbook. And I think that that's always been the goal. And yeah, it would be great to install certain things, right? It'd be great to install an RPO package. They did run a little bit of RPO in New York with Daniel Jones. It's not something that they were at the top of the league in doing, but they definitely did it more with the Giants and the Patriots did with Mac Jones last year.
They also ran a quarterback sneak on 3rd and 9 backed up.
Oh, I'm not trying to say that he's a good coach on that side of the ball. I'm just saying that that's a reality, right? Daniel Jones did run some RPO, some option.
Yeah,
He's a better athlete in terms of running around than people give him credit for, and his ability to move the chains with his legs. So they did do some of that. I have always stood by, and I 100% still stand by, because I get these two questions all the time. I get people that ask me, are they going to go more like Buffalo and Kansas City, right? Are they going to be spread? Are they going to run RPOs? Are they going to be college meets NFL spread system? I also get the questions of, why aren't they more like San Francisco or Los Angeles with the Rams? Why aren't they running wide zone? Why aren't they running motion and misdirection, condensed formations, and 3 wide receiver or 21 personnel like the 49ers do? They are not going to change fundamentally who they are. They are not going to change the roots of their playbook. They are not going to change the system. They are going to keep the system the same, and then they're going to adapt and integrate around that. But this goes back to Charlie Weiss. The Earnhardt Perkins verbiage actually goes back to even before Bill Belichick was here.
right.
This goes back years and years and years into the 80s. But in terms of the actual stylistic values of the playbook, the foundational elements, the gap run schemes, pulling guards, power schemes, fullback leads, play action off of those things, using shifts instead of using motion, using multiple personnel groupings. Those things were always going to stay. And that's just the Patriot way. And that's how it's going to be. I was hoping that they were going to at least add some things in and add some new wrinkles into that sort of thing. But fundamentally, they were never going to change the playbook.